for the standard human being, loss hurts more than gain rewards. And so, well, it's useful to know that because it helps you understand yourself and other human beings. Even if you're trying to motivate someone to do something, loss avoidance is often a powerful motivation as well as gain. So, all right, prevention, fundamentally. Okay, so now here's another way of thinking about this. And this is a more abstract way of thinking about it. So we talked about the idea that the world might be divided into tools and obstacles and irrelevant things, most of which, and irrelevant things, that's a huge category, and it's the one you don't want to have disrupted. And also that the obstacle category produces more emotion than the tool category. But here's another way of thinking about it. And this is thinking about it more from a purely emotional perspective. When you think about the world as tools, it's dead practical, and it's sort of grounded in the idea of motor usage in some sense. But you can think in an analogical fashion about the same system in a slightly different manner. You're in the situation that you're in right now, and that's not good enough. And so that's another thing that's kind of interesting about people, is they're chronically dissatisfied with the way things are. Well, that's okay, because you wouldn't be motivated to move forward if you weren't chronically dissatisfied with the way that things are. But it's kind of annoying, you know, because you might think, well, why aren't you just happy with what you have? And the answer to that is generally, because I don't know if it's going to last. And so that's part of it. And the other is, well, if the situation shifted a bit, maybe I'd have more options, and some of that would be, it would last longer, it'd be more stable, it'd be more promising. And so you can say, well, you should be satisfied with what you have, but it's kind of really a stupid thing in some sense to tell human beings, because no matter what you have, it isn't going to solve your fundamental problem. So the problem isn't going away, and you can't just fool yourself into saying, well, what I have is great. You could say, I could have a hell of a lot less, and that would be bad, and most people have a lot less than me, and I should be grateful for what I have. That's fine, that's perfectly reasonable. But you're stuck in this, you're stuck with this chronic sense of unfinished business, and the reason for that is, well, you're permanently vulnerable, so how else would you, how could it be otherwise? And even if you've got your problem solved, then there's 3 or 4 people in your family that by no means have got their problem solved, so the problem of problems never goes away. That's an that's a good thing to know existentially too, because it helps you calibrate your life properly. Because you might be thinking, well, if I just got everything together, you know, I'd hit some plateau of satiation and stability, and then I would just be there. It's like, no, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So you might as well just forget about that. It's a Sisyphus issue, you know, the guy who pushes the rock up the road and up the hill and it rolls back down. I think it was Nietzsche who said we must presume Sisyphus to be happy. Something like that. Well, maybe you want to push a damn rock up a hill, you know, it's going to roll down again. It's like, what are you going to do? Just sit there by the rock? It's okay to be active, even if the problem you're trying to solve is not fundamentally solvable. That doesn't mean it isn't worth trying to solve. So, although people can despair about it, and it's not surprising. Okay, so another way that I should have really said, instead of predicted outcome here, this is like an old model. This would be a model that I derived from work that was done at least initially in the 60s, or even in the 40s, and that still underlies the thinking of, I would say, the vast majority of psychologists. It isn't that you're predicting outcomes and failing. It's not that. It's that you desire outcomes, and sometimes you get an undesirable outcome. And it's really important to get that distinction correct, because if you're thinking about expectation, it's just a cold cognitive model. It's like a rational model. I know the world, I understand its relationships, I can predict what's going to happen next, and that's what I'm trying to do, is predict it. It's like, no, you're not. You're not trying to predict it. You're trying to get what you want from it. And there's a prediction element to that, which is, well, you know, I'm going to pick that up, so that's a prediction. And that worked, verifying my prediction, but what's missing there is I want to pick that up. And you can't throw that out of the equation, because as soon as you throw motivation out of the equation, then you're stuck with the mystery of perception, right? So how do you organize your perceptions unless you want something? Well, you can't. So you don't get to get rid of the want and just substitute cold expectation. It's a sleight of hand. And the cognitive behaviorists do that. They almost always do that. That's how they well, it's not like a conspiracy or anything, it's perfectly reasonable to have a simplified model for the way that people act, but you don't want to throw motivation and emotion out of the equation, because obviously or embodiment, they're so important. Okay, so forget predicted and unpredicted, think desired and undesired. Okay, so I come walking in here and I have this low level desire, which is to make my way to my podium with the least amount of effort necessary, and I see that chair's in the way and it's mildly annoying, and so there's something undesired there. So the desired outcome produces positive emotion. It's promise. What's technically speaking, you could also think about it as hope. It's related to the attainment of a goal. It indicates the potential attainment of a goal. That's what hope is, or what promise is. Hope is, I can probably attain this goal. Promise is, if something is promising, it indicates to you that you can probably attain the goal. Or if someone makes a promise to you, then they're telling you that they're going to facilitate movement towards a goal. And so that's the emotional level that the dopaminergic system works on. Again, it's promise or hope, or technically it's called incentive reward. That's the technical term. But it's the indication that something good is going to happen. Well, so when I see a clear pathway, then I know I can make my goal pretty efficiently, and so it's going to produce it's going to produce enough positive emotion to make me walk forward. That's the right amount. So it's interesting. So you can actually use this when you're thinking about room design or house design. It's like, so you're in a room. Well, what am I going to use this room for? It's like, okay, you sort that out. Well, then you want to make the pathways to that use as clear and pristine as possible, unless you want to put in some interesting variation just for, decoration. But fundamentally what you're trying to do is to set up the environment so that it facilitates the actions you intend to pursue there. If you go into your room and it's all covered with stacks of paper and they're all messy, and the bed isn't made and there's rubbish everywhere, by your definition of rubbish, then what you're doing basically is walking into a room of snakes. And it's the same system that's responding to all of those undone things that would respond to snakes. Not like a cobra that's right beside you, but it's the same damn circuitry. It's the circuitry that responds to chaos. It's the circuitry that responds to the dragon of chaos that makes you uncomfortable in a room like that. It's not explored territory. It's not a place where you can easily see the proper relationship between the tools and the obstacles. It's not a place that you can make things irrelevant. Not at all. In fact, it's a place full of obstacles. Well, how are you going to be comfortable in a room like that? It's full of things that get in the way of your goals. You're going to be nervous in there all the time. So it's like it's full of envelopes that you haven't opened, and most of them have bad news in them. You're not going to be comfortable in a room like that. You think, well, can't you just ignore those envelopes? It's like, well, it's a stupid way of looking at it. So, promise produces hope / pleasure, curiosity, all the incentive reward related emotions sort of fit in that box. And then undesired outcomes produce threat. They're threats, and they produce anxiety. But that's not even exactly right. That's in an elementary discussion. of the role of comparator systems in the brain, which we'll talk about in more detail. The general notion is that the violation of an expectation produces anxiety. And that's a pretty good model, and it's got some support from the psychophysiological, pharmacological literature, because if you give animals anti-anxiety agents like benzodiazepines or alcohol or barbiturates, they do respond less to the violation of, quote, expectancy. It does dampen the response. But it's an oversimplified model, and to get understanding of human behavior correct, you have to expand it a bit. It isn't precisely that unpredicted outcome is a threat and it produces anxiety. It's that unpredicted outcome makes the irrelevant relevant, and it produces an undifferentiated emotional and motivational state.